Hello students. So, we had completed till desertification. Now starting with conservation of forest and wildlife. We have just studied that one of the adverse effects of deforestation, that is large scale cutting down of forest trees, is the destruction of natural habitats of wild animals and birds. So deforestation poses a serious threat to the survival of wild animals and their natural environment. The large-scale poaching, that is killing, of wild animals residing in the forest by men is also a big threat to the survival of many animals and bird species. The death or killing of wild animals disturbs the food chains in which these animals take part, resulting in undesirable consequences for the whole ecosystem. We should conserve forest and wildlife to preserve biodiversity, to prevent endangered species from becoming extinct, and to maintain ecological balance in nature. Some of the measures which can be taken for conservation of forest and wildlife are the unauthorized felling, that is cutting of forest trees for timber trade and firewood, should be stopped immediately. This is because depletion of forest destroys the natural habitats of wild animals and birds and exposes them to the cruelty of man as well as nature. In case of government authorized felling of forest trees, for every acre of forest cut down, an equal area of land should be planted with saplings of trees to make up for the loss in the long run. The natural habitats of wild animals should be preserved by establishing conservation areas such as biosphere reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, and national parks, where the wild animals can flourish in a natural surrounding protected from the outside world. A total ban should be imposed on poaching or capturing of any wild animal or bird. Now, what are these biosphere reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, and national parks? The purpose of establishing several biosphere reserves, wildlife sanctuaries, and national parks in India is to conserve wild animals and their natural surroundings so as to maintain a healthy balance in nature and to prevent the extinction of endangered wild animals. First of all, what are biosphere reserves? A biosphere reserve is a large protected area of land meant for conservation of wildlife, biodiversity, and the traditional lifestyle of tribal people living in the area. In creating the large areas of conservation called biosphere reserves, the need of local people to have access to the resources of this area has been kept in mind. So, a special feature of the protected areas called biosphere reserves is that local people or tribals are an integral part of it. A biosphere reserve is a very large conservation area which is divided into three zones: the core zone, buffer zone, and transition zone. The innermost zone of a biosphere reserve is known as the core zone. The core zone of a biosphere reserve is devoted to strict protection of wildlife. No human activity is allowed in the core zone of a biosphere reserve. The middle zone of a biosphere reserve is called the buffer zone. The buffer zone surrounds the core zone. In the buffer zone, only limited human activity is allowed. For example, research, environmental education, and tourism are allowed in the buffer zone of the biosphere reserve. The outermost zone of the biosphere reserve is called transition zone. In the transition zone, several non-destructive human activities such as settlements of tribals, cultivation of crops, etc. are allowed, which are necessary to sustain the life of tribals. Some tribal people live in the outermost zone of a biosphere reserve who depend on the local natural resources to fulfill various needs of life. A biosphere reserve may also contain other protected areas in it. Like, for example, a biosphere reserve may contain wildlife sanctuary or a national park in it. The names and locations of some of the biosphere reserves in India are Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve, Kaziranga Biosphere Reserve, Sundarban Biosphere Reserve, Kanha Biosphere Reserve, Pachmarhi Biosphere Reserve, and many more. Let us see the flora and fauna of the Biosphere Reserve. Some plants and animals typically belong to a particular area. They are not found naturally in other areas. The plants that grow naturally in a particular area are called flora of the area, and the animals which live naturally in a particular area are known as fauna of that area. The plants and animals of the particular area are called flora and fauna of that area, respectively. Like for example, the fauna of Pachmarhi consists of wild dog, cheetal, wolf, leopard, blue bull, barking deer, etc. Endemic species. Endemic species are those species which are found exclusively in a particular area. Endemic species are restricted to a certain area. Endemic species are not found naturally anywhere else in other areas. The plants and animals which are found only in a particular area are said to be endemic to that area. So, sal and wild mango are the two examples of the endemic flora of Pachmarhi Biosphere Reserve. Now, next is a wildlife sanctuary. The term sanctuary means a place of safety. So, wildlife sanctuary means a place where wild animals remain safe. A wildlife sanctuary is a protected area of land which is created for the protection of wild animals in the natural environment like forest, in which no hunting is permitted. A wildlife sanctuary provides protection and suitable living conditions to the wild animals in their natural habitat. In a wildlife sanctuary, killing and capturing of wild animals is strictly prohibited. A wildlife sanctuary does not allow any human activity which disturbs the wild animals or their habitat. So, in a wildlife sanctuary, animals live in a natural environment protected from people. Some of the threatened wild animals which are protected and preserved in our wildlife sanctuaries are black buck, white-eyed buck, elephant, golden cat, pink-headed duck, gharial, marsh crocodile, python, and rhinoceros. India has preserved vast tracts of forest and natural habitats for its wildlife sanctuaries. The wildlife sanctuaries are spread across our country and provide a fascinating diversity of terrain, flora and fauna. Some of the wildlife sanctuaries found in India are Sanjay Gandhi Wildlife Sanctuary located in Maharashtra, Mudumulai Wildlife Sanctuary located in Tamil Nadu, Nagarjun Sagar Wildlife Sanctuary in Andhra Pradesh, and many more. Now next we are going to learn about national parks and the other topics in our next video. Thank you for watching it.